This year marks the 10-year anniversary of the release of Batman Arkham Knight, along with other titles like Witcher 3, Fallout 4, and Bloodborne, which should make all of us feel really old. Somehow this is the very first time that I've played this game, as I've been pushing it off for years now. I beat Arkham Asylum and Arkham City very close together a few years ago and somehow just ignored this one. But you know, I thought the 10-year anniversary would be a great time to play it and see if it still holds up to modern standards or if it's aged poorly. I have absolutely adored the Arkham franchise and it's probably the best superhero video games that we have ever received. Unfortunately, Rocksteady refuses to utilize this unbelievable franchise and decides to release games like this, which was definitely well received by fans. I do hope one day they bring back the Arkham franchise and expand on it in a new way, but who knows, it's been 10 years so I think it's unlikely. Arkham Knight though is a really interesting game to say the least. I was aware of some of the issues coming into things and yeah, there are definitely issues. But to only point out those shortcomings would be a disservice to the amount of good that this game brings. Arkham Knight is a mixed bag for sure. There are some great parts and other parts that aren't the best. But overall, this is still a fantastic conclusion to the Arkham trilogy and a game that I thoroughly enjoyed my playthrough of. And in this review, I'm going to be basically spoiling every single thing that happens in this game, so if you don't want that, click off now. Before we really get into things, if you guys enjoyed this video, it would mean a lot if you could like, comment, and subscribe as we are trying to reach 1,000 subscribers. With that being said, let's jump right into things. Starting things off with the setting of this game, Arkham Knight somehow is still one of the prettiest games I have ever played. This continues to beat titles that are released today and it amazes me how that is even possible. Other games that were released that year still look great, but they don't hold up as well to modern standards. But I still think Arkham Knight rivals modern games in the graphical aspect. It doesn't differ too much from its previous titles as it still takes place in Gotham, but the presentation and graphical difference is crazy. One thing that the Arkham games always did a great job at was nailing its atmosphere and setting a vibe that it held throughout the entirety of your playthrough. That fact still stands here. The very beginning of this game, the city is evacuated and everyone that is left are practically just thugs and villains. I was worried how they were going to make the city still feel alive, but they did that. It truly does feel as if Gotham is in complete disarray. Basically every person you will interact with throughout the open world will want to take you out. There's no walking in the streets as you'll just be attacked at almost every point in turn where a bunch of thugs will just jump out of a car and attack you. Or if you're in the Batmobile, tanks and other cars will start shooting at you. Even if you decide to glide your way through the city, which was the main way that I traversed, there are countless buildings filled with enemies that you have to take back over and they are ready to fight you. Somehow with the city void of civilians, it still felt alive, and it was filled with content. Even though I don't think all the side content was the greatest, it is abundant and fills the world out beautifully. There is so much stuff to do and never once did I feel like Gotham was dead. It felt so alive because these thugs and criminals you would just randomly come up against and it felt natural and realistic. Of course some fights are very planned out and set in specific locations, but just your normal fights with no mission attached to them felt like they occurred so normally. You're walking on the street and a car drives by and you hear, "Wait, that's the Batman!" They stop the car and all come out to fight you. It all happens seamlessly. Outside of the immersion aspect though, the city of Gotham is just genuinely drop dead gorgeous. From the start of the game to the very end, I never felt a drop in quality in the slightest. I don't know if it's just the way that I felt, but the use of the rain really made it look so much prettier. And they're able to just have it rain the entire game as this whole thing takes place in one night, which I still don't know how that is even possible. But the rain, the shading, the lighting is just perfect in every way. When you compare the Batsuit from Arkham City to Knight, it is such a big difference. I was in awe the entire time. From the way they had the moon reflecting on the wet surfaces in your wings as you're gliding, the bright neon signs on the buildings, the street lights and signs throughout the streets, each aspect from top to bottom was gorgeous. Sure, I think you slightly see the age of the game a bit more in terms of the face models, but I still think those are done very well and by no means have aged badly. The setting hands down was one of the best aspects from this game, and I'm just so impressed how a game like this can be 10 years old. This is not what I picture when I think of games from a decade ago. But moving into the next portion of this video, we will be talking about the gameplay. This is where this game shines, but also falls short in a lot of ways. There are two main forms of gameplay within Arkham Knight. You have your good old hand-to-hand combat, stealth, and gliding, but in the game we are also introduced to the Batmobile, which is probably the most criticized piece of content ever added into the Arkham franchise. For the most part, this is disliked by most fans, and I am also one of those fans that doesn't like the Batmobile that much. Now look, I honestly think it is well designed and enjoyable to use in some sections, but I honestly think it takes up too much of the gameplay time. People over exaggerate the amount of time spent in it by a long shot, but I would still say around 20 to 25% of the game is spent in it, as other people have said as well. You can also cut down on the time a bit if you don't use the Batmobile to go around the city and do what I did, which was just gliding around. But with that fact out of the way, I still think it is overused, as they use it in sections of the game that just don't need the Batmobile in it. I think in some chase sequences it works well, and a few tank fights would have been fine. But there are major moments in the story where it just does not fit. Most of your fights with the Arkham Knight involve using the Batmobile. And why is every puzzle in existence basically using it as well? I think some of the puzzles surrounding it work, but I feel like almost every situation where you have to solve something, you are using it. I don't want to be playing a Batman game to be using the Batmobile this much. Even 20 to 25% is way too high in my mind. The portions that make Arkham games so special are its combat and its stealth. They are so enjoyable and great aspects to the franchise as a whole. Like I said, the Batmobile is still fun. Some of the chase sequences are really enjoyable, as once you get a hang on the sensitivity of driving, it is awesome. I also love how so many objects in the world are destroyable. It makes the world feel so much more real as I'm drifting, destroy a few corners of buildings, a few lampposts, and cars in the way. It makes the Batmobile feel genuinely powerful, as basically the only thing that can stop it from moving is trying to go straight through a building. And I just love calling for it and watching it just destroy everything in its path trying to get to me. The Batmobile is still an overall negative in this game, as it's just used way too much, and having to fight 40 to 50 enemy tanks at a time is not enjoyable at all in my opinion. You just spend way too much time in it. I think mechanically and the way it functions is well done, but it is used way past its enjoyability mark. But getting into the portions of the gameplay that I enjoy, we have basically everything else. The hand-to-hand combat in the Arkham franchise still might be my favorite combat system in any game. It is fairly basic, don't get me wrong, but just since it is basic does not mean it's not good. It's perfect. It is such a fluid and free-flowing system. From the countering, timing attacks, different enemy variety, it is all done so well. The longer and longer you chain attacks together, from punches, counters, it just continues to get better and better. It simply does. The longer you chain attacks together, the more chances you get to use special takedowns and disarms. This is one of those games where it's so enjoyable playing it on a higher difficulty, as the combat, no matter how difficult, is just so much fun. There are a few different enemy types, from armed thugs, ones with shields, brutes, and medics, but you meet all of them fairly quickly, so that's not a great aspect of this game, but it's never something that feels like it needs expanding on. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but the combat in the Arkham games are simply addicting. I would play a game with nothing else but its hand-to-hand combat. I enjoy it that much. And in certain portions of this game, you are able to play as two characters at the same time. From Robin, Nightwing, or Catwoman, and even though they all practically play the same way, each one has such a unique animation set that feels so different between every character. That is an insane achievement. Making pressing basically only 2 buttons feel so different between multiple characters is insane. It's something that makes the Arkham combat stand out. The camera work and animations are just so top tier. Every single fight feels like some cinematic moment in a Batman movie. The way they give different camera angles on different takedowns, the sound effects when knocking them out. Each fight I feel like I am Batman through and through. Every single hit has a weight behind it, which some games struggle to portray. In every single fight I feel like I enter this flow state at some point, not even at my own doing but the game itself. They were able to capture such a rhythm in every single fight. No matter how many enemies, no matter what types, you just enter this flow state of just subconsciously countering each move, moving to the next enemy, jumping to the next, and at times not getting hit the entire fight. You feel invincible. At surface level, it is as simple as it gets. You block, attack, stun, and dodge, and have a few gadgets you can use at times. But the detail of it comes in the portions you wouldn't even think about because they make it feel so seamless. The Arkham combat is just simply perfect, and I really don't think I have played a game that has topped it. But along with the hand-to-hand combat, we had the stealth sections as well, which I honestly think were equally as good. And I think this has a lot of depth to it. From all the different gadgets, different takedown methods, enemy behavior, there are a lot of factors that go into these portions of the game. And Arkham Knight very much sets up certain locations to be stealth oriented. I honestly feel like there should have been more in this game, and obviously it's been a few years since I played Asylum and City, but I feel like stealth was a lot more involved with those. It's probably because we had the Batmobile eat up some of the game time here, which is unfortunate as the stealth mechanics are fantastic in this game. Starting off with the different takedown methods, there are many ways to stealthily sneak up on an enemy and take them out. From the silent takedown, fear multi-takedowns, doing it from a vent, a corner, a gargoyle, there are a multitude of setups here to take out your enemies. And the gadgets help you achieve this, from the voice synthesizer being able to trick your enemies to move to different locations, the disruptor to sabotage weapons, explosive gel, smoke pellets, and especially the remote hacking device to disable sentry guns, tanks, or anything else of that sort. This just sets up so many different combinations of ways to take out your enemies, and the way that you do it will affect how they react to the situation. If you rely on gargoyles, they will start placing mines and scanning the area. If you use vents a lot, they will start throwing explosives into them. You directly affect the way the enemies act depending on how you approach stealth. And using stealth in the Arkham franchise feels different to other games' stealth systems. In many games where stealth is involved, you're trying very hard to not be detected and don't feel like you're necessarily instilling fear into your enemies. But with Batman, it feels like you're mentally torturing them. The more people you pick off, the more frantic and nervous they get. You feel like a predator taking out its prey stealthily one by one. The enemies start to freak out and act out of order. They start shooting randomly in the sky. You straight up instill fear into them. You are fully in control of this battlefield in the stealth sections. You plan out these attacks, manipulating where they move to, what sections you can explore, and take them out one by one. You feel like this creature in the shadows that they can't see, and you're just waiting for your opportunity to pounce. I love the stealth in this game so much and wish there was more of it. The last bit of gameplay that I have to speak on is the traversal. You have two main methods of this, and that is gliding and the Batmobile. I mainly use gliding as I didn't want to use the Batmobile unless I had to. I don't think the traversal is some top tier unbelievable system. This is no Spider-Man-esque traversal, but I still think it handles things very well. From seamless transitions of riding your Batmobile into ejecting from it and gliding, and then going from gliding straight into a fight. There never feels like there are some abrupt transitions between things, and makes the game feel so smooth. At times though, locking onto something you wanted to grapple to was annoying, but that was really my only issue with it. Gliding through Gotham was gorgeous and was always a lot of fun to do. Moving on from the gameplay though, something I want to touch on is the side content, and there is a wide range of it in this game. All the pieces of side content here revolve around some kind of villain that you face at the end. We have missions for the Riddler, Two-Face, Penguin, Firefly, Professor Pig, Man-Bat, Deathstroke, and Hush. And for the most part, I do enjoy a lot of these missions. I think at times they do get fairly repetitive in terms of the gameplay loop, but the gameplay itself is fairly enjoyable, so it never becomes too big of an issue for me. My favorite missions by far were the Riddler ones where you have to save Catwoman. It's probably my favorite over the fact that there's a lot of variety in it, from puzzles and Batmobile races. The puzzles themselves are pretty simple, but I still enjoyed them. But those Riddler trophies? I'm sorry, you are never gonna catch me doing those! And with Two-Face, it's really basic as you just go through these few stealth sections stopping these bank robberies. Again, not too much variety, but still fun to do. The Penguin missions, you and Nightwing helped take him out through a few different fights, which were also fun to play through. Firefly was really basic as there's these 3 chase sequences where you have to outlast his jetpack fuel. Professor Pig, I really enjoyed the mystery behind it and unraveling it, and just thought it was a cool story. The same can be said about Man-Bat, as the story behind Dr. Langstrom was interesting to learn about. I also like the Azrael side content where you have to do these challenges with him trying not to take damage. And lastly, the one where you have to save the firefighters and learn how the chief was working with Firefly to start the fires to keep his men's jobs was really cool. I think Deathstroke and Hush were really underutilized or just done poorly in my mind. I can't even begin to imagine what went through their mind when they thought making the Deathstroke fight a tank battle was a good idea. It's basically a carbon copy of the tank fight we have with the Arkham Knight in the main story. It was really poorly done, especially since they had such a great fight with him in Origins and proceeded to make it a tank fight with Deathstroke in this game. It was terrible. And for Hush, I just wish it was more drawn out like these other missions. We get one short thing where Hush captures Lucius and we save him. But there's this super interesting dialogue and history that Batman and Hush seem to have, and I wish that was expanded on over multiple missions instead of doing it all in one. I do like how they handle the side content though, because the concept of the story being that you have to save Gotham in one night, you had to make this side content feel relatively urgent and not out of place of the tone that they were setting with the narrative. But I think they nailed it here by bringing in all these villains to wreak havoc on Gotham on the same night, as this was the perfect night to do it. So I did very much enjoy the way they handled that. Overall, the side content is mostly enjoyable. Some missions are repetitive and some villains are not handled the best, but for the most part I really enjoyed what we got from it. Now finally, moving into the last part of this video, we are going to be talking about the story and narrative. Now, a lot of people seem to have issues with the story in Arkham Knight, and a lot of these issues that they have, I can relatively see where they are coming from and even agree with it in many portions. I just want to get this out of the way though, throughout all the Arkham games, I've never really held too much of a weight in its narrative, so even if it's not the best here, it doesn't ultimately affect my opinion on the game that deeply. But to briefly give you a summary of this narrative, Scarecrow is threatening Gotham with this fear toxin and is partnered with a new character named Arkham Knight. So it is our goal to stop them. But during this whole thing, Batman also has to deal with the psychological battle of the Joker trying to take over his body as his blood is in Batman. Batman early on is hit with the fear toxin, and his biggest fear is the Joker taking over his body and becoming unstoppable. So he has to deal with this throughout the whole game. I still don't really get how just Joker's blood can cause someone to transform into him, but I didn't worry about it too much. And I'll be honest, I really only cared for the Joker and Batman dynamic throughout the story. I still think Scarecrow is cool and all, but I was a lot more invested with Joker and Batman. Also, a lot of people have issues with the Arkham Knight. I'm not as deep in the Batman lore and all aspects of it, so I'm a little more indifferent to it, even though I still do think he was wasted potential, which we will get into. I'll start off with the opening of this game though, which I absolutely adore. From the get-go, the environment and vibe is top tier, the graphics are unbelievable, and they do a great job of setting up the story quickly. Within the first 10 minutes of the game, all of Gotham is evacuated over the fear toxin. This leaves the city as an absolute war zone with only thugs and villains roaming the city and causing mayhem, with Batman standing as the only hope for the city. Scarecrow's goal is not only to plunge Gotham into darkness, but also wants to break Batman and show to the world how he is just a man and not someone to place your trust in. Throughout this game, we see Scarecrow mess with Batman in so many different ways, truly just trying to break his spirit and resolve, with the biggest thing being the hallucination that Barbara took her own life. This story very much plays on the psychological side of things with Batman, which was by far my favorite part of this story. I wish they dove into it even more, but even with the amount that they did, it was done well. From the fear toxin and hallucinations that Scarecrow is doing, all the way to the internal battle between Batman and Joker, he is struggling mentally throughout. And his dynamic with Joker is perfect. I really think Joker is the best character in this game. This gave me such memories and flashbacks of playing Cyberpunk and having Johnny Silverhand constantly there talking to. But obviously there isn't an ounce of niceness or anything that comes from Joker, as that man wants your body for himself and is just poking at you the entire game. I love every single interaction that you have with him, and he brings so much humor into the story. I was genuinely laughing at multiple points throughout this story purely because of something that the Joker said. But there's also such depth between some of the conversations that they have. He seriously pushes Batman's psyche, especially in the moments where we see Joker torturing Jason Todd. They hold such an interesting dynamic, with them heavily pushing the idea that they are two sides of the same coin and one cannot live without the other. Watching them interact is some of my favorite stuff from this game. But now, talking about the Arkham Knight, this is where I struggle a bit with the narrative. This is the very first time that we get introduced to Jason Todd. There is no mention of him in any other game, and his character never really gets a chance to be built up whatsoever besides in these flashbacks. And even someone who's not amazingly in tune with all things Batman found it pretty obvious that the Arkham Knight was going to be Jason Todd. Like, it was so predictable once we saw those flashbacks of Joker torturing him. And Arkham Knight in general I felt was underutilized or just not used in the right ways. I feel like with as much history as Jason Todd and Batman would have, I wish we got to see that history more in the lead up to this game. We never get to see them interact ever until they meet again near the end of the story. We do clearly see how this has affected Batman though by the way he treats Tim Drake, who is the new Robin. He is a lot more hesitant with letting him go and do things and is more distant from him overall, clearly due to the effects that Jason's death had on him. We see this with everyone in this game though, from Jim Gordon, Oracle. Batman is very protective over these people and does not want to see them get hurt. But getting back to Jason Todd, I feel like once we have the big reveal, it just kinda ends there for Arkham Knight until he pops up and helps us at the end of the game. I just don't feel like there was much closure on his character in the slightest, and wish there was. But finally, moving on from Jason Todd, as the story progresses, we are basically just trying to stop Scarecrow through many different methods. One is we get help from Poison Ivy and break out roots for her to control, and to rid the city of the gas, she gives her own life for it. We also have some sections on airships looking for Stag, who helped make Cloudburst. We go after Arkham Knight in a few different fights, and we also have to stop Harley Quinn at some point and recapture the people who were infected with Joker's blood. As the story goes along, some portions just kind of felt out of place or just not needed at all. Or looking back on the story, it really doesn't feel like much happens, or just things are not being fleshed out enough. We had the foundation for an amazing story, but Joker kind of overshadows the main villains in this game, and I wanted them to play a bigger role. Like, I really wish we got to see more interactions overall between us and Scarecrow and the Arkham Knight. I wish we had Scarecrow mess with us a bit more in the build up to the end of the game and mess with our heads even more than he did. I wish we had more of a dynamic build between them too. But the story did have solid pacing at times. I wish certain aspects got fleshed out a bit more, but it's not that bad. I still never understand how all this happens in one night though. Like, it's absolutely insane how Batman can pull all of this off. But as the story boils over to the end of the game, we have Batman having to sacrifice his own identity to save Robin and Gordon. Scarecrow is prepared to show the world the small man that Batman is and break the myth of the Dark Knight. Everything that has happened throughout the story has boiled up to this one moment where Batman faces his fear of the Joker taking over his body for one last time, and he prevails. Through this, we also learn about Joker's biggest fear, and that is being forgotten. I think this is a pretty cool final moment with some amazing sequences, but it felt, okay, I don't want to say cheap, but it felt just easy to be like, oh, my mind was too strong for you to take over. I don't know, for such a cool concept of this mental battle between the Batman and Joker, it just felt really easy to just conclude it that way, that his mind was too strong for the Joker to take over. But moving on from that whole battle between the Joker and Batman, no matter how much fear toxin juice the Scarecrow was putting into Batman, it was not working at all, and we eventually reversed it onto him and we captured the Scarecrow. That's where this game kinda ends. This is such a big issue for me, you don't even understand. The Nightfall Protocol is stupid. I don't even think the ending in of itself is that bad, but what you have to do to reach this ending is so annoying. Once you beat the main story, you are given a prompt saying you have to continue to finish Gotham's Most Wanted to get the true ending. One ending comes from finishing 9 out of the 14, but the true one comes from doing all 14, including every Riddler trophy. I'm sorry, I am not spending hours upon hours doing those trophies just to get an extra minute for a cutscene. It is horrifically designed. There's no way you feel accomplished or happy after completing that. I don't know whose bright idea it was to make you 100% the game to get the real ending. It is so frustrating. The ending itself though, I guess I don't hate, it's just kinda there. What Nightfall Protocol basically is watching Bruce Wayne presumably fake his own death by destroying the Wayne Manor. There are probably hundreds of people at his manor and we watch him arrive to it, and once he goes inside, we see it blow up. But in the final scene of the game, we kind of see this Batman-esque figure save some people in the street. It also kind of gives off this fear toxin vibe, so it is theorized that he uses the fear toxin in these battles now. I don't hate the ending, but it's just kind of there, it doesn't do much for me. They purposely left it very ambiguous. But with them leaving it ambiguous, it kind of gives them the chance to possibly return to this franchise, hopefully. But disregarding all that, I still do think Arkham Knight has a solid story. This is nothing that I'm going to be sitting on for a while or even reminiscing on narrative wise. But it is still enjoyable and I love a lot about it. Especially Joker and Batman. They're top tier in this game, and watching that mental battle between the two was intriguing. But it somewhat took away from the other aspects like Scarecrow and Arkham Knight, where I think they could have done a lot more with. Overall, Batman Arkham Knight holds up beautifully 10 years later. Better than most games could ever wish to hold up. From the gameplay, the visuals, this title is still some of the best out there in that aspect. But by no means is this game perfect. There are flaws, and a decent amount of them in my opinion. I think this game had potential to genuinely be an all-time great one if some of the aspects narrative-wise were fixed and if they fixed things with the Batmobile. But unfortunately that is not the case, so this is not an all-time great game. But it is still a very good one that I loved playing. I enjoyed every second of my 30ish hour playthrough and think it was a solid conclusion to the Arkham franchise. I do really hope though to see it brought back in some way. Even in 2025, Batman Arkham Knight is a great game to play, and my final rating for it is an 8 out of 10. If you guys made it to the end of this video, thank you guys so much for watching. Your support means the absolute world to me. If you did enjoy it, it would mean a lot if you could like, comment, and subscribe. We are trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. Again, thank you guys so much for the support. It means the absolute world to me. I'll see you in the next one, and God bless.